a lot of people are concerned. Maybe I should turn this into a just chatting stream real quick, because I'm done with the dailies on Thingy, so we can just chat a little bit so that I can explain you guys the whole Shift Up IPO thing, right? All right, because you have people that are reporting into it now, which is very weird to me because there were already articles a year ago about Shift Up going into an IPO. I could try to find them later, but so the idea of a IPO, right? You'll make me blush, gal. The idea behind an IPO is, generally speaking, let me just snooze the ads as well. The idea behind an IPO is that you wanna generate money for the company to fund their projects. So there are multiple ways a company can make money or have capital to invest into projects. One of them is they can sell rather. They can have companies sell, buy their shares into their company through rounds of funds. So, for example, Shift Up sold, I think, around 20% minority stake to Tencent, for example, over a year ago. Some of you may remember that. Meaning that Tencent holds around 20-ish% of Shift Up stock in their portfolio. And that's how they got a lot of money for Nikke, for example, to make Nikke. They also made rounds of funds. They also sold some minority stakes to Kakao and some other Korean companies. They didn't only do it with Tencent. They also sold to Kakao Games and to some others. And the other way they can do it is they can borrow money from companies, right? So they can basically sell bonds that they will then pay back later. Those, generally speaking, don't make that much money for the company for funding projects, but it's one way of doing it. Now, the other way that they can do it is if they're big enough and they're solid enough, they can make what we call an IPO, initial public offering. The initial public offering allows them to be publicly traded. By being publicly traded, they are under a significantly more stringent set of rules in terms of accounting, in terms of accounting and auditing, in terms of transparency of what they do with the funds, in terms of how some part of their value chain functions, which is why some companies just decide to never go public. They could go public, but they don't, because if pieces of their value chain through this process becomes known, they will lose a competitive advantage that they have in the market. So they sometimes just decide not to as a result of that. Now, through this IPO process, what ShiftUp will do is they will have very large funds. They could do it to use it to create a brand new game. They could use it to further develop Nikke. They could do it to further develop, I don't know, a sequel to Stellar Blade. They could do a lot of things. People in the States can invest, then you should... it's going to be publicly traded. You can buy shares on ShiftUp once they do their IPO. It will be traded on the Korean market, but you can buy them just like you can buy... I can buy shares from the US if I make a US account and everything, and I can buy shares from the US. I can also do swaps, which allow me to effectively buy shares, right? And you can do the same for the Korean market. You can do the same for the Hong Kong, Shanghai Stock Exchange. You can do it for a lot of things. That is never an issue. You can find ways to trade those. So anyone, it's open. It's IPO, it's public offering, right? Now, that money can be used for projects, and it will be used for projects. Generally speaking, you're not going to do an IPO for the just sake of having money to then give to some imaginary investor. You're never going to do that. IPOs are always done to be able to take further the company into projects that they would have been unable to fund otherwise. And because it's a public offering as well, there is this level of auditing and transparency that is mandatory by law to be publicly traded, that makes it a little bit of a more trustworthy investment for some people to enter that IPO. The biggest investors during IPOs are, generally speaking, institutional investors. Institutional investors, that can be BlackRock, that can be your hedge funds, that can be retirement funds, that can be people that will buy very, very large volumes. People being worried about Shift Up going public, the only real concern that you could have when it comes to a company going public is whether or not management will be influenced by short-term decision making to keep a high what's it called, a high value of the stock while they are in power, meaning that while the CEO is in tenure, basically, for example, if a CEO is there for only 5 years, he might have an incentive to boost up the stock short term for those 5 years, even though he knows that it will do a nosedive after his 5 years because it will make him look good. That is something that could happen, but again, it's not a guarantee, and it also depends on the management style, on the people, and everything. So stock price can influence some of the decisions, but generally speaking, it's also a very big positive because they are mandated to have more transparency. You know where the money is going, you know what they're doing, and they have significantly more cash at hand to be able to do those projects. Generally speaking, a company, for example, Shift Up, is a company that is known for very fan-servicey stuff. So they're not going to randomly turn around and censor everything. That would make absolutely no sense. They made a lot of their basis on this. You look at Stellar Blade, a lot of people are talking about the big cake that the female protagonist of Stellar Blade has. Their biggest success is Nikke, and it's a very fan-servicey game. It would make no sense for them to suddenly, because they're publicly traded, especially people that invest into Shift Up, the people that are actually investing into Shift Up are people that know what is their core products. It's not the word that I'm looking for, but let's just call it core products. They know what they do, and they know what makes Shift Up successful. They make games, and they make like decently fan-servicey and loot games. So if you're buying into that stock as an institutional investor, you're not going to try to pressure them. And you cannot really pressure them because at the end of the day, it's still what they're going to put out in the IPO should not be should not be enough to have hostile takeovers. That's like M&A and IPO 101 is that you do not put into circulation enough stock to just get randomly a hostile takeover. Twitter and some of the other cases are kind of special. Generally speaking, you avoid that because you don't want to have corporate raiders or activist investors. Activist investors has nothing to do with like climate change or anything. Activist investor is a term for people that are kind of like similar to corporate raiders. So you want to avoid to have that, so you're not going to put shares that are material enough in circulation that they would take control of the company. It would make no sense, and that is the problem, right? Is that a lot of people don't have a lot of financial literacy when it comes to these things, which is fine because it's a field of study that is quite complex, and it's understandable. Not everyone studies finance. That's what people like me exist for, is that I study finance so that I can help people with that, whether with investments or with other things. That's the entire point of my degree and my job description. The problem is when you have a Cro-Magnon level of discussions happening, and then you have these like clickbait, hype, fear-mongering content creators that take this from Cro-Magnon levels of discussion into tardigrade levels of discussion. Hashtag don't be a tardigrade. And start, fear-mongering people into, oh yeah, there's going to be like censorship, like shit, like I'm sad that they're going public because I spent $1,000 in the game and now they might be censored and they're going in a bad direction and everything. It's a fucking IPO. What do you mean? An IPO by itself is not a bad thing. Generally speaking, it's a great thing for companies because they get so many funds out of it that allows them to do so many more cooler projects. And the effects of an IPO when it comes to the negative effects on management are never seen within the first year. Those type of changes, you will only see them, like you might see them if there is like a change in the company culture like multiple years ahead of the line. It makes no sense to panic over a simple IPO. I don't know if that makes sense, right? If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask, by the way. Like, the concept that by default, because Shift Up is doing an IPO is... I don't want to insult people that were worried because worries are valid, but is objectively not... It's not something you should worry about too much. Generally speaking, it's not a bad thing to have an IPO. Some companies actively decide to not go public because they want to either stay in the family. So, for example, the Groupe Chanel, which is one of the biggest luxury brands in the world, is owned by a family. It's a family business. Believe it or not, it's a family business. Some others, as I mentioned, they do not go public because they have material value chain information that would be revealed if they go public. So they avoid it. And the last bit that don't do it is because they don't need the funds at the end of the day. Or they have other better ways to get funds by either borrowing money, depending on their average cost of capital. They could like do different ways of handling it, right? Based on how much the cost of debt is, based on how much the cost of capital is, they could have different ways that are more optimal to do so. In Shift Up's case, they decided, okay, IPO is probably the best way we have to gain a lot of money to do a big project. So the thing that I would look most into is, okay, they're getting a lot of money from the IPO. What big project are they thinking of doing? Rather than being scared, it actually surprises me that people are not excited for that, because they're going public to get a lot of money to be able to do bigger projects, right? That's the whole point of it. Because they're trying to get a amount of funds that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise than going public. Now, ShiftUp is classified as a unicorn, meaning that it's a small tech company that generates that is valued over $1 billion. ShiftUp is already valued over $1 billion. It's what we call a unicorn in the finance sector. So they're gonna get a lot of money out of that IPO, even if they don't sell a lot of shares. They need to sell something like 10-20%, I think, by law. 2.3 billion to you. Yeah, 2.3 bill. There we go. I didn't remember the exact value, but to be classified as a unicorn, you need to be above 1 billion. So there you have it. So yeah, they're gonna get a lot of money out of it, even if they sell like 20. I think it like by law it was 20-ish%. I think minimum. So 20% of like, what are they funding with 520 million, for example? Because that's the money that they would be getting. So ShiftUp wants to expand into other projects, hence the IPO. That's the entire point, right? Thinking about. At a minimum, they're probably going to be getting somewhere in the ballpark of like $500 million. Like, let's say something around there. I'm not exactly sure how much money they would actually get because I am not in charge of the IPO. I don't know how much they're going to buy the stock for, because currently, like, it's valued at 2.3 billion, but it doesn't translate into that when you do an IPO. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But let's imagine. Okay, let's imagine that they're valued that they're going to be selling each share at a specific value that... What? Oh, lol. There we go. Let's imagine that they're going to be able to sell shares in a way that fits the 2.3 billion. And they're selling 20% shares total. They would be getting over $500 million. That's a lot of money for a very big project, or for multiple decently big projects, right? So yeah, instead of being tardigrades and being worried that, oh, IPO bad, capitalism bad, and everything, that's a lot of funds that could go in a fucking amazing project by ShiftUp. They have demonstrated over and over that when players give them a lot of money, they are reinvesting a sizable chunk of it into the game. That's how we got a fully voice-acted Christmas Miracle, right? That's how we got that fully voice-acted Christmas Miracle event. They had no obligation to voice that one. They had no reason to, right? They had no reason to fully voice act one of those, right? But they did. They have been making bigger and bigger events. They have been expanding further and further the events, and they've been making the game bigger and bigger. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to reinvest that into Nikke specifically, because it's Shift Up itself that is making it, right? And that is something that I don't know why people Nikke is a 4A game. Damn, that meme is amazing. But that is something that I personally never understood, right? As someone that is in finance, is that IPOs are not inherently a bad thing. So being concerned just because it's an IPO makes no sense to me. Right? Makes absolutely no sense to me. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me, because I will gladly answer as many doubts that you have about IPOs, the whole process of generating funds for companies, cost of capital, cost of debt, or why are you so cute? You're gonna make me blush, gal. 500 million can buy one really nice yacht. That's the thing, right? Is that IPOs, because they're under a very strict process of auditing, you know where that money is gonna go for. Because companies that go public are under a far stronger scrutiny than companies that are not publicly traded, under auditing and everything. And it's by definition to prevent issues like pumps and dumps and any other types of quote-unquote scams that have happened in the past. And understand like 89% of it. Which parts are you not understanding? Like, people are just afraid of censorship, but like, why would you be worried about censorship if the institutional investors that are interested in investing in Shift Up, they already know what the core product of Shift Up is? It's Nikke, it's Stellar Blades, it games with a lot of fan service, right? Like very, very sexy females and everything. This is not a situation like, for example, Gumroad that happened recently, where Gumroad has decided to remove NSFW content from its website, which will destroy them financially, by the way, because MasterCard and Visa and some others have stakeholders that are trying to, because they're like Puritan groups, are trying to remove lewd content from the internet. This is a very different situation. And I don't even know if Gumroad is publicly traded, because it's a very different situation from Gumroad, who is basically being pressured by payment processing companies into removing NSFW content, right? In the case of Nikke, that's not an issue. Cover Corp going public, because Cover Corp is publicly traded, means that suddenly they're gonna stop making VTubers stream variety content, or have them, not do VTuber concerts anymore or something, right? That's kind of like almost the equivalent of saying one or the other. And I'm okay, I could be wrong, right? Because at the end of the day, nobody can predict the future. But I doubt that Shift Up will be doing something like that, or that any institutional investor would be willing to sink the value of what they're buying by trying to materially affect the core product, which is video games with a lot of fan service, because of some weird bias.